Hi, and welcome to a new episode of the Digital Access Show. Now, over the last little period, we've been looking at individually each of the principles: perceivability, operability, understandability, and robust. So that's the four principles of WCAG, and the acronym for that is POUR, P-O-U-R. Today, we want to look at conformance. How do you actually ensure that you do conform and meet the accessibility guidelines? What's involved in that process? And to do that, I've brought along again Mark Muscat, CEO of Digital Access Solutions and Assistive Technology. Morning, Mark.
Good morning, Narelle. It's actually, yeah, well, hello to everyone, whatever time you may be. Yes.
Okay. He's
And I'm not
also very
CEO,
quicky.
I'm just the person that works at Tacit. That's all I am.
He has CEO in his name. Please
Yeah,
disregard
well,
that.
yes.
And he's the we as we point out, he's the boss, the ultimate decision maker. So,
No, I'm
Mark,
not the boss.
seriously, as the as a digital, and you are a digital accessibility auditor yourself, and how long have you been doing the auditing side of for digital accessibility?
On and off, I've probably been involved with web accessibility for over 15 years. Um, so, I was when I was a web developer, I was doing some accessibility. And probably more so just recently. But yeah, on and off, yeah, it would be around 15 years.
So you've been involved in a lot of the changes that have happened with the web content accessibility guidelines as well, seen the improvements
Yeah,
in
so I think I
the
started off,
testing and the criteria.
yeah, I definitely remember WCAG 1.0
Mm-hmm.
when I was doing my postgrad. Um,
Yeah.
and then that just goes how long I was doing my undergrad. But yeah, and that was still pretty much a white paper. It was still um, kicked around as an interest thing rather than an actual conformance or standard. I don't think it was actually attached to any standards at that time. I think the standards were applied when 2.0 came out. I might be wrong, but it certainly would have been around 2.0 that things
Okay.
started to get more formal, which is what we're talking about today. Um,
It
the
is.
formalities. So yeah, there's a bit of history there, and um, yeah, I was as I said, I was a web developer, so I didn't really care about accessibility. Sorry, I have to
Mm.
say that because when you develop, you actually just want to get things built. And so even a blind person like myself could fall for the trick of not caring about accessibility. It's so easy to do.
It's
Um,
so sad too.
oh yeah, I could be, yeah, but you got to get things done, and the projects need to be delivered and all that sort of stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
um,
And I agree with that when you're in the middle of doing those projects, because I've been involved in many as well.
yeah, I mean,
About
but the
meeting
thing,
deadlines and not considering the user,
yeah, that's right.
because
But I think
you've got the specs and you build to specs.
and that's right, and this is what we've all been saying for years and years and years and years. If you put the specs, accessibility specs into your spec documents or your
Mm.
sets of specifications, it certainly makes that accessibility, but um, yeah, uh, straightforward. So with with software engineering and practices and development phases and so forth. Yeah, you could actually make that more. Um, you can make accessibility more prominent by just putting it in little parts,
Mm.
because you'll just make that whole system work. But yeah, I think now it's becoming more like that. It's more streamlined.
Mm.
But yeah, when I was doing my postgrad, and even as a commercial um, developer, we certainly didn't really look at that as a big. It wasn't a high priority, which is I'm sorry to say that, but yeah, I mean, I've been on
Everyone,
both
like,
sides for the fence.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. Mark, everyone's talking about AI and they think that you can conform using AI. What's your opinion on that?
Um, that's a good question because AI is just basically a learning model or series of learning models. So if you could
Mm,
teach AI to how to access it, and I think AI in a way is as blind as we are. So when you look at it, if AI is blind like we are, um, albeit that you can actually pick up a graphic file and go through it, pixel by pixel and work out what it's meant to be just through pattern recognition.
mhm,
Um, that's possible, but it is blind. Um, and again, it needs to learn. So if you could teach it, if you can teach those models what is accessible and what isn't, I think it could be ultimately helpful. But when it comes down to it, though, you need to have somebody with those expertise to actually teach um, those AI models how to actually work out what conforms and what doesn't, and that still takes quite a lot to do.
mm,
But no, I mean the other side to the coin is that, as you know, different people have different needs in the realms of disability. So my particular way of using a computer is completely different to what you would do. So I don't know if AI can actually do that. It's a hard one because there are so many variations of the color white, which is not true, but there's always one white.
mm,
But there's so many colors that make that. And um, but if you know what I mean, there's so many variations to what's required. So look, I, it's a hard one. Will it work? Possibly. Will it do what we want it to do? Don't know. Yeah, that's. I know there's some people looking into the research, and that's something like Dr. Scott Holly would be
yep.
worth having a chat to about that. But
Mhm,
it certainly would be um, an interesting project for somebody in the
mhm,
AI sphere and accessibility sphere. But no, when it comes to testing, definitely not. The only way to test is to actually get people of different required, uses to actually
mhm.
test the system.
Mhm.
So, yeah, what's your thoughts on that, Narelle?
No, not at the present time. I'm not saying in the future it can't, but
So
at the current
I'm an
time, no.
optimist, and
Yeah,
Narelle's,
I'm a
yeah,
realist, is what I say.
realist.
I'm not saying it won't. What I'm saying is it can't at the present time. Mark,
Yeah,
when we're talking conformance, which is ultimately what we're talking about today, what has to be done, or what is the methodology behind ensuring that a site or a document, an app, whatever it is, conforms to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines?
well, it's actually all throughout the four principles, isn't it? When you read
Mm,
the actual WCAG document itself, it actually tells you. So you're testing for three levels of conformance.
mhm,
Um, so at this stage, it's A, double A, and triple A. It could be something different in the future, I suspect. But so and each of the clauses within the principles have what is required to meet those particular levels. So when you read the actual document itself, rather technical document, but when you read it,
mhm,
it actually makes a lot of sense. So it actually outlines what's required for A, what's required for double A, what's required for triple A. Some clauses um, have all three, and some clauses will have a minimum. That's the way I read
mhm.
it. Minimum
Yeah.
of what's required, and basically you just if you wanted to, if you wanted to bring look at a level that you wanted to reach, for instance, you would need to have all the causes that fit in for that particular level. So if you're looking at the normal's AA, so that's pretty much most of the clauses in the principles. There might be a couple that you don't need to worry about, but the majority have to be reached. And if you want AAA, then there are certain other, that you need to conform with AA first, but you have additional clauses that need to be reached and tested and met. So that becomes AAA. But yeah, it sometimes can be a bit difficult to know if you haven't seen a particular site. That's where you need an auditor to actually say, yep, okay, this is we know what the benchmark is because we've seen the sites that met these criteria. Yep, this is what we need to test for. So sometimes it's a bit hard to when you try to test yourself, which is okay to test yourself, but if you don't know or haven't got a comparison, it sometimes can be a bit tricky to work out what conforms and what doesn't.
So what does the auditor actually do then, Mark?
Well, that's a question I'm going to ask you, Narelle, because you're the auditor. I mean, I can tell you what the auditor should do, but you can tell me, Noah. Yeah, I'll let you, because you do the auditing a lot more than I do. So I'll let you sort of work out how you want to answer that. But I'll chime in if I need to.
Yeah, the auditor there's two audits that you do. So if you're building a website, which is when we recommend everyone incorporates the Web Content Accessibility Guideline into, once the website's built, or once the document or the app, it doesn't matter what digital content we're talking about, the auditor will go look at the content and test the content, test the structure of the site, test everything related to that site against the criteria, that what we call success criteria. And there are tests that can be run, there's hundreds of them. And an auditor is very good to be able to, the auditor can quickly look at a site and recognize where probable issues are. However, the auditor must go through every success criteria. And there are different auditors use different levels. I'm quite black and white. I say you either pass or you fail. Others say somewhat, no, somewhat, or yes. The reason I never do no, somewhat, or yes, I don't have the somewhat, is because if it fails, it's adding a barrier to someone. So it might work for some people, but it might not work for other people. It won't work for other people. So it's yes or no. Then the auditor should produce a very detailed report, actually. And this is why auditors should be an IT based auditor, so someone that's got the IT knowledge, coded, a lot of experience in IT, because they don't just say yes or no. I always like to provide why it's a barrier, which gives the reason why it's yes or no. You could add, if you wanted, how you tested this, but the barrier should be enough. And I also like to give a possible means to resolve the issue. And if I do that, then the report is quite a detailed report. But the important thing for auditors, and it doesn't matter whether it's myself or someone else, that audit should be representative of the site. So in other words, if the site's built using templates, which is fantastic, because you fix the template and then the changes flow through everywhere, then you might only have 4 or 5 templates for that site, that's all you're auditing. That's all you need to audit. If the site, every page is customized and built differently, then every page on that site has to be audited. That's where the expense comes in. Once the audit report's done, it is the auditor's responsibility to meet with the developers, meet with the website owners, and go through and explain what the issues are and why they're the barrier. Once that one's done, then it gets handed over to the developers, because in IT, one of your golden rules is you never do a final test of your own work. You can code, you test it to what we call the system test. Does it all link together? Does it do what you want it to do? Yes. Then you hand it over to what we call the user testing phase. The user testing phase is that phase where the user, in this case, the auditor, goes in and does very thorough checks. Any bugs, they get handed back to the developers to be resolved. And then it's tested again, pass, and go on. So I'm working the user testing area of the development lifecycle. Once the developer has fixed everything, and there is always a consultant, a digital accessibility consultant, which in our case is always you, Mark, to do the tech and talk to the developers if they've got any tech questions, anything like that. That gets resolved. Then it gets handed back to me to do the final audit. And again, the final audit is exactly the same as the initial audit. I go through and I test against every success criteria. At the end of that, you will have a website that meets the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And that's when we can provide you with a certificate. It's a W3C certificate that you can attach to your website as a HTML page that says, we meet this. I think the one thing that people forget, websites and documentation is updated continually. So that certification only lasts a year. Have I covered it all?
Yes, pretty much.
What about?
And different auditors do it differently too. Like I tend to use a lot of scripting in terms of scripting the tests to do different things at the start, which is quite a classic model, really. A lot of the accessibility consultants and auditors will do exactly the same thing. But yeah, these days it's a streamlined process. I mean, auditing is pretty much something you do right at the end when you are fairly sure that your internal testing has been done. And I mean, I tend to, as a consultant, will show the types of testing that is required. So whether you apply that in the testing phases, most people should, but sometimes it doesn't happen because the site may not be public or ready enough for people to look at, you know, in a public context. So it's sort of with web applications, it's more when it's ready to test. Yeah, but everything you said regarding the criteria is pretty much the same. You know, you apply that those tests whilst you can, and then I suggest to always do an audit at the end, just to be. You hope that everything's pretty much finalised by that
One of
time,
the
and you just
issues,
what's that?
one of the issues that we always come across is a lot of websites today use a variety of plugins to do different activities, functions, like with WP Forms to act as a forms page,
Yeah,
contact us, whatever you'd like to call it. Now, a lot of those don't necessarily meet all the web content accessibility guidelines. The
yeah,
rules say for a site to meet all the to be certified at, say, the current level is 2.2 level AA, all pages in the site must meet it. How do you deal with those cases where they're using a plugin that doesn't meet the rules?
that's the thing with those web content management systems. You really are you really are at the mercy of the actual developers who do develop the plugins. Um, Look, to be honest, I know WordPress is trying to make a big inroad into making their uh, um, accessibility, a better environment, so that across the board, when you put in um, put in a plugin, it should be conforming. But the WordPress organization themselves can't control what developers do for their plugins.
Mm.
So it's a case of just trying to work out um, uh, what plugins to get, and that's a bit tricky because you might want to plug it. It's like horses for courses, really. So you might want to get a plugin for a particular requirement uh, of your site, and that could be a carousel, for instance. It could be something like WooCommerce is actually quite accessible. Um, so if you stick to the common ones, they should be okay. But as you've pointed out, it's not always the case. There are some times where um, people don't update their plugins, and that's because um, if you're like me, you go and play with the plugin, and you don't really want to update the plugin because you've made some changes to the actual code.
Mark, I mean, there is a place where we can say in the certification that, look, other than this plugin or this particular functionality, the website does meet the guidelines. Is that okay?
Well, you could, but it certainly would tarnish the integrity of the actual web, so the accessibility of that particular website.
Mm.
Um, and I don't feel comfortable doing that too often.
Mhm.
In fact, I don't feel comfortable at all because it's to me an excuse that when you're dealing with a formal type structure like the WCAG is, um, it really needs to be it needs to be upheld.
Mm.
So I look, I'm sure you're going to get different views on this question. Um, as a person who uses assistive technology and it actually does what we do, um, I don't agree with it. No, I think I would try to work with the developer to see what solutions can be reached before putting that stamp on it. There's no, and I know we're probably shooting ourselves in the foot business wise, but I stand by accessibility more than I stand by so that's if that doesn't indicate you know how important accessibility is to me, I don't know what will. But it would be very rare that I would actually put that stamp on a document to say that, yes, this is beyond a person's control.
Yeah.
Most systems, Squarespace, Word, WordPress, if you're going to use that kind of platform, yeah, unless you're using some really old code, yeah, there will be a way where you can fix it and go to some new plugins, and that's really up to the developers to do that.
Okay.
So if we knew somebody was using a plugin that was 6, 7 years old, and it was totally inaccessible, well, we can just say, yeah, you really need to update that plugin and you need to use that version because it's got the accessibility requirements met. And if they say, no, we're not going to do it, well, why should we put a stamp on it? Because it's in their control to actually make that happen.
Mark, what's some advice you can give in regards to conformance to anyone that's listening?
Um,
Should someone do it?
should they audit?
Should.
Yes,
Mm.
absolutely. Yeah, an independent auditor, all the projects I've worked with, and I've done some projects with some major commercial companies where I was a consultant, and I've always learnt from that point that you should always hand it over to somebody independent. I did I learned that from when I started doing some web accessibility consulting 12 years, 13 years ago,
Mm.
where not even longer than that, was probably 15 years ago now, where yeah, I just said to the CIO of the company I was contracted to, I said, look, I don't care who you do it. Don't tell me. I don't want to know. But you might want to get this audited
Mm.
just for everyone's, you know, um, you know, safe for their own mind. And they did. They went ahead and they got it audited and paid for it. And yeah, it was bang on the nail in its accessibility. We got no comments back to say anything needed to be. I think there was one spelling mistake, which is marketing's problem.
Yeah.
Typical advertisement. But yeah, that was it. But, obviously that was 2.0 then. So
Mm.
yeah, it would be different now. But yeah, honestly, independence from try to keep things as independent. It's like building, really. You build a structure, and before you pass it on to the buyer, you certainly want to get an engineer to check the structure and all that sort of stuff. So this is very similar to that. Um, um, and that's the way I look at it. It's a good thing to have in the context of making sure that if people say, "Oh, I've got a problem using this website," there's two reasons why they have problems using the website. One, they don't have
Mm.
the sufficient understanding of the assistive technologies that they're using, or the website itself is inaccessible. And sometimes it can be a combination of both. So it's a case of, um, you know, if you were to have somebody who's audited and it conforms to the criteria, well, you could say, well, okay, that person probably needs some training in assistive technology to actually use this website. And by doing that, it's probably going to help them to understand how to use other websites.
Mark, how can
So,
people get in contact with you if they want to catch up
well,
and
they can
talk to you
contact you.
about getting their website done?
They can contact you, Narelle.
Oh,
How's that
you're a
sound?
stirrer today. I know, in other words, for everyone that's listening, Mark actually leaves tomorrow, 2 days' time, to go to Japan for 4 weeks of leave. So, yeah.
No, that's not 4 weeks. Well, you're going to give me 4 weeks, are you, boss? That's good. I'll take 4 weeks.
No,
No, it's 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah.
They can contact us looking at probably go to our website,
Mhm.
dasset.com.au,
Yep,
and all our details are there.
yep.
They can talk to you, Narelle, and um, yeah, you're probably a better person to talk to. So,
Look,
no,
thanks for having.
dasset.com.au. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, it's like that in that mood, the mood just before you go on leave. And thank you. Thanks, Mark, for coming on. Thanks for talking about conformance with us. If you like what we do, please like, share, subscribe, review. We love any feedback. Any comments, we'd absolutely love to know your thoughts about whether a website should be tested for the digital accessibility and meeting the web content accessibility guidelines. See you next time on the Digital Access Show and have a good week. See you later.